What is going on, everybody? Today we are talking recursive triggers in Apex and how to prevent that from happening. Let's take a look. All right, so let's do some basic setup. So here I've got an account trigger on account after update that's going to call an account handler, and we've got a method called handle, which for every account that's getting updated, we're going to create an object or a record called car, and it's going to look up to this account, and then we're going to insert that list of cars. And then in our car trigger, we are going to update that account that the car is related to. So this is going to cause an issue where the account trigger calls this trigger calls the account trigger again, and it's running in an infinite loop. So one suggestion that some people are going to do in orgs is they're going to create a Boolean variable here, a static Boolean, right? Public static Boolean, trigger has run. Okay, and then we're going to do if trigger has run. We are not going to do anything, and we're going to return from the trigger. So this will prevent any of the other code in the method from running. And then at the end of it, we're going to say, we're going to put it here. So then after this is run, it's going to prevent this trigger from running again. So let's go ahead and deploy that. Okay, and now I've inserted 1,000 test accounts for this. So let's see what's happening. So what we're going to do is delete any existing cars to start fresh, and then for every test account that I've created, I'm going to update the shipping street on that just to cause the trigger to run. So let's go ahead and execute that. Okay, and then let's check the logs on that. Okay, so I got a attempted reference null object. So that is here. So I'm just going to set this to false just to do that. Deploy that, and then we're going to rerun this. Okay. Execute anonymous. All right, and let's check our logs from that. Okay, so now what we've got is, okay, so in the debug log, we can see that we're only entering this account handler class one time, as opposed to constantly running again after the car trigger is causing the account trigger to run again. So let me just show one thing. Let me show you the accounts that are actually in this trigger, because we'd expect there to be 1,000, right? Because there's 1,000 that meet the criteria from the SOCL that we're running in that execute anonymous block. So account.id, deploy this, and then we're going to rerun our execute anonymous block. Okay, so grab the logs, this. Okay, so what we're seeing is there's only 200 accounts that are actually getting into this account handler. And so let me just show you in the org itself, where name like test. So there's 1,000, right? So in the SOCL that we're running here, we're saying the same query, but it's only, and it's getting all of those accounts, but it's only getting 200 in the actual account handler for that transaction. So the reason for this is that when you're calling the account handler from the account trigger, it's batching this into groups of 200 records, which is how Apex processes it. So what's happening is it gets through 200, then you're setting the static flag, and then it says, oh, I actually don't need to run that again. Because, so in the entirety of the trigger transaction, there's 1,000 records that need to get processed. But Apex is batching it into groups of 200 records. And what's happening is once the first 200 run, we already have this flag set to true. So this static flag exists across all of the 200 groupings of how those records are processed. So let me show you what's happening if, let's just not even do this, so we don't have the trigger, and I just want to show. So I'm going to show you what's happening if we have the whole thing run and how the Apex is actually grouping these into groups of 200 records from the logs. So we're going to deploy that, and then I'm going to rerun our anonymous script. Okay. Grab this. So now you can see here, there's 1,000 records now that we're not stopping the trigger after the first batch of 200 is run. So this is what we want to see, right? Because we have 1,000 accounts that are getting updated, and we want the trigger to run on all 1,000 accounts, not just the first 200. So, and if you look in this, if you look into what's getting called here, method entry, account handler is getting called 5 different times. So it's in 5 different, basically, groupings of how it's run. I'm not sure exactly what the documentation calls this, or if they really outline it in the documentation. I haven't really seen anything, but it's the whole trigger transaction, and then that's groups of 200 records. So what we can do to get around that is, instead of using a static Boolean flag, we're going to use a static set of IDs. I can't spell. Processed equals new set ID. And then we're just going to take this out. We're going to say if that contains account ID. Continue. Okay, and then at the end of this, we're going to do add. Okay, and now I'm going to call this recursive trigger again and see what happens here. All right. So if this runs correctly, we'd expect 1,000 car records, and there's 1 per each account in the org. So let's just see what we've got in the debug logs here. Yep, so it's run for 1,000 accounts. Okay, now let's see how many car records there are. There's 1,000. So that worked exactly like we wanted it to. So now we're actually able to update our accounts. We can update 1,000 at a time, which is causing the separate trigger to run the car trigger, but it's not causing our account trigger to run a second time, or at least the logic in the account handler. So it's going to run the trigger a second time. It's going to get here and it says, oh, actually, we don't need to process that because this account has already been processed based on this static list. So if we look at the, this is some official documentation, best practices to avoid recursion. So it's the same recommendation. It's create a static variable and then check if basically if the variable has not been set to true, then execute the trigger logic. So the issue, let's just try it like that, but the issue is the same, right? So if you go here, account handler, trigger has run, I'm setting it to true, but then I'm checking it in my trigger, and I say account handler.trigger has run. So if it hasn't run, then I'm going to call the handler class, and let's see. So I'm going to run the same execute anonymous block. Yep, and so 1,000 records are getting updated, right? 1,000 accounts. You'd expect 1,000 car records to be created based on what's in the trigger handler, and we're only finding 200. So it's the same idea here. If you're using a static Boolean, it's only going to run the trigger handler 200 times, or it's only going to run for a single grouping of records, which in this case is 200. It's 200's the max. So it's breaking up into chunks of 5 different groupings of how the trigger is handled. That's all for the video, guys. Let me know if you liked it. Leave a comment if you want to see more, and I'll be back next week for some more videos.